Imagine this situation. You come in on a Friday to play Commander, find a table with 3 players you don't know, and you sit down to play. By about turn 5, you realize that one of the players is just a bit stronger. You can tell that you should have paid attention to this player a bit earlier by looking at the lands they're using. Today, I'd like to talk to you about utility lands. I made a short video before, dedicated to examples of mana bases in my Commander decks for the 3rd and 5th brackets. But today, I want to draw your attention to the Stellar Insights sheet, which will be released in the Edge of Eternities set. This sheet features a large number of utility lands. I think this is a good reason to take a look at some of these lands. I've picked out 29 out of 44 so far. In theory, there should be a few more. There are literally just a couple missing, but the sheet is almost completely filled in. So, I wanted to draw your attention to some of them. And also, at the end, we'll discuss the new lands, the new type of planet lands, that will also be featured in the main Edge of Eternities set, and their power. I must say right away that I will not consider lands that animate for a large amount of mana to become elemental creatures. I think these lands aren't worth playing in Commander unless you have some special synergy with elementals or with certain keywords that these lands provide. For the most part, these lands aren't interesting to us because they enter tapped. Yes, they provide colors, but you can't fit them into every deck. First in alphabetical order, we have Ancient Tomb. When you tap it, it gives you 2 mana and deals 2 damage to you, considering that in Commander you have 40 life. Those 2 damage are nothing. It's played in the 3rd, 4th, and 5th power brackets. Games there can end as early as turn 4, or as late as turn 6 or 8. And that small amount of damage you deal to yourself is a negligible price for the mana acceleration you get. Tap it, get 2 mana, take 2 damage, play a mana rock for 2. That means on turn 2 you're way ahead. Ancient Tomb was last reprinted 2 years ago. Since then, its price has gone up. Use proxies. Guys, this land is ultra expensive. If you have it in your collection, congratulations. Alright, let's move on. Blinkmoth Nexus in this list will have a few lands that can animate and become creatures, but for just 1 mana. Funny thing, you can tap this land, and it can animate itself. It becomes a 1/1 artifact creature with flying until end of turn and still remains a land. If you have artifact synergy, if you need some evasion, and you know how to put counters on things, it makes sense to include this land. Animate it for 1 mana, stack a certain number of counters on it, accumulate them, and well, this will give you a bit of protection for your counters and your work against a board wipe. Because in the land slot, this land will still just be an artifact creature with flying, simply accumulating counters on itself. And you probably won't use the second ability. You most likely won't have a Blinkmoth type creature that you also need to power up somehow. Let's move on. Bonder's Enclave. Not a bad land. If your commander has power 4, or you have a lot of creatures with power 4 in your deck, then overall, this can be a card draw for 3 mana and a tap. So a total of 4 mana, because Bonder's Enclave will also be tapped in the land slot. Next is Cascading Cataracts, an indestructible land. Originally, I used it in my 4th bracket Megatron deck. Megatron generates up to 8 mana in the 2nd phase, and this land lets me filter that mana into the colors I need. I have spells that require 3 white, or 2 black. Even though most of the spells in my Megatron deck are colorless, sometimes I still need colored mana. And being able to add 5 mana in any combination of colors is a really good plan. Originally, I included this land in the deck for Armageddon. I had a set of indestructible lands and the ability to play lands from the graveyard, but later I abandoned that plan in the deck. But the land stayed because it proved to be really effective. If you can generate a large amount of colorless mana, consider Cascading Cataracts as a filter. Next, Cathedral of War enters tapped, but what we're interested in here is the Exalted trigger. When a creature you control attacks alone, that creature gets +1/+1 until end of turn. You can use it for Voltron, or in a deck where you have some positive triggers like draw a card if a creature with greater than base power deals damage. Let's move on. Crystal Quarry is great for 5-color decks, an excellent filter. It's a bit reminiscent of Cascading Cataracts, but it only really works in 5-color decks because it gives you all 5 colors of mana. Deserted Temple is a very powerful land. If you see a player and they have a Deserted Temple on the table, there's definitely going to be some other land that produces a lot of mana, which they'll want to untap. It could be Gia's Cradle, or it could be cards similar to Gia's Cradle. Those enchantments in green that you tap, and they also give you mana equal to the number of creatures you control. It could be Cabal Coffers, or it could be Minamo, which would be used for synergy with untapping some legendary permanent. So pay attention. Deserted Temple is a very, very powerful land. It can also untap a target land under an opponent's control. Here, it doesn't specify exactly how, plus, with Rings of Bright Hearth, this can be a combo for infinite mana. Dust Bowl, pay 3, tap, sacrifice a land. Destroy target non-basic land. It may be used rarely, but only in decks that can actively return their lands from the graveyard, as an outlet for destroying enemy lands. Well, it's pretty unpleasant, but most likely you'll hardly ever see it. Echoing Deep is a very interesting land with a cave subtype. We can have it enter tapped as a copy of any land in a graveyard, except that it's a cave in addition to its other types, and when tapped it gives 1 colorless mana. For example, you used your Urza's Saga. Echoing Deep can come in as a second Urza Saga, if Glacial Chasm is in your graveyard because you sacrificed it. Echoing Deep becomes your second Glacial Chasm, Eldrazi Temple. This one's simple. It gives 2 mana, but only to cast Eldrazi or activate Eldrazi abilities. Gemstone Cavern. If it's in your opening hand during that pregame phase, you can put it into play with a luck counter. If you do that, you have to exile a card from your hand. It's almost always played in the 5th bracket. I rarely see it at casual tables. Well, if someone drops a Gemstone Cavern, to me that's a sign the player is tryharding. They're really, really trying to be fast. So, you definitely need to pay extra attention to that player. Grove of Burnwillows is a pretty straightforward land that heals our opponents. Yeah, the life gain factor isn't that important here. Usually, lands that give you a certain color end up hurting you. But here, it's the opposite. Don't want to hurt yourself, but want to get green or red? This is a good land for your deck. Besides, that 1 life in Commander probably won't make much of a difference. High Market is an interesting land that is also a sack outlet. Yes, it gives us 1 life, but that 1 life isn't really important here. What matters is that we can sacrifice a creature under our control. If you're playing a reanimated deck or have Death Synergy in your decks, then High Market is worth considering as a sack outlet. Next, Inventor's Fair fits into any artifact deck and serves as a land slot tutor. It gives you a little bit of life, which is nice. If you control 3 or more artifacts, you gain 1 life. For 4 mana, you can sacrifice it and search for any artifact, putting it into your hand. You can only activate this if you control 3 or more artifacts. So, this land fits perfectly into any artifact deck. Next, Inkmoth Nexus. Oh my god, how do you even pronounce that without twisting your tongue? This is a really nasty land because it gives us a Phyrexian artifact creature with flying and infect. If we put 10 counters on it, well, 9 to be exact, it becomes a deadly threat to any opponent. Pay very close attention to this land and to proliferate triggers. If possible, next up is Lotus Field. When this land enters the battlefield, it has hexproof, enters tapped. You have to sacrifice 2 lands, and it will give you 3 mana of any 1 color. It's most often played in white decks and is a sign that the player wants to have fewer lands than their opponents, which allows them to activate white catch-up ramp. This is white ramp that activates and works if the player has fewer lands than the other opponents. Lotus Field helps you get closer to that goal and gives you 3 mana of any color. And interestingly, after playing Lotus Field, you can copy it, and if you turn off ETB effects for permanents, then you don't have to sacrifice 2 lands. It's a very interesting land, in my opinion. Everyone who plays this land definitely has something in mind. Mana Confluence. It's simple. Pay 1 life, get 1 mana of any color. It's played in the 3rd, 4th, sometimes even the 2nd bracket, and of course in the 5th as well. This is a land that helps you stabilize your mana, especially if you're running more than 2 colors. Mutavault, for 1 mana, becomes a 2/2 creature with all creature types and still remains a land. I play Mutavault in my devil deck. There aren't many devils, so I need attacking devils. And Mutavault, in general, can become an attacking devil when needed. Besides that, what's nice is that with Inkmoth Nexus, Mutavault, and Blinkmoth, I'm going to twist my tongue. Nexus. Putting Mutavault into just any deck doesn't really make much sense. But again, if you have some kind of synergy with creatures of a certain type, Mutavault is a creature of all types, which is convenient. Nesting Grounds. For 1 mana, move a counter from a target permanent you control to another target permanent. You can remove lore counters when working with sagas. You can move +1/+1 counters. You can move finality counters. For example, you take a finality counter off your own permanent and put it on an opponent's permanent. Now the opponent's permanent has a finality counter, and it will be exiled if it gets destroyed. Nesting Grounds has been reprinted several times. It was first reprinted in Fallout, then in modern sets, and now in Final Fantasy Commander overall. This card has gotten the number of reprints it needed, and it's currently being played, so you can see it around. Next up is Petrified Field. Sacrifice this land. Return target land from your graveyard to your hand if you need to cycle through some specific lands. Petrified Field can help you with that. For example, you can cycle Inventor's Fair, which will fetch you an artifact. You tutor for an artifact, then return Inventor's Fair, play it again next turn, tutor for another artifact, and assemble some kind of combo. Plaza of Heroes came out in Dominaria United, and it saw a lot of play in many places, but overall, it can even be played in Commander. I haven't found myself a copy of Plaza of Heroes yet, and I also haven't found a deck where I really want to include it. But it's worth considering this land overall as a form of protection. It either adds 1 mana of any color, but only for casting legendary spells, or it adds 1 mana of any color among legendary permanents you control, or it adds colorless, or for 3 mana and tapping it. Exile this land. Target legendary creature gets hexproof and indestructible until end of turn. So, if you have a deck where you really want to protect a certain legendary creature, then Plaza of Heroes will help you cast it, effectively stabilize your mana, and help protect it if needed, all in a land slot. Power Depot. An artifact land that enters tapped. With Modular, it enters with a +1/+1 counter, and when it dies or is sacrificed, you can put a +1/+1 counter on target artifact creature. Again, not for every deck, but if you have ways to sacrifice lands, you'll really want to do it, then sacrifice the artifact, most likely in a red deck, because you can sacrifice this land and it'll also give you a counter. Reflecting Pool. Even though I have this land in my collection, for some reason I never really believed in it. But it exists. It gives you 1 mana of any color that a land you control could produce. There's no point putting it in monocolor decks, unless you're trying to activate Field of the Dead somehow, because Field of the Dead requires lands with different names, and Reflecting Pool can help with that. And in 2-color decks, I don't really see much point In 3-color decks, well, it seems like it's easier to stabilize with shock lands, fetch lands, and other pain lands. Although, maybe Reflecting Pool deserves a chance. I tried, but it just didn't work out for me. If you have more positive examples of using Reflecting Pool, and it hasn't let you down, let me know in the comments. Scavenger Grounds is a great land. It has the desert subtype, and for 2 mana and tapping it, you can sacrifice a desert to exile all graveyards. It doesn't have to be itself. I play it in my humans deck. There's Sand Scout, which lets you fetch a desert onto the battlefield when it enters. And we can either get, say, Scavenger Grounds or another desert. Either way, it's an option to find graveyard hate in a land slot. Strip Mine sacrifices itself to destroy a target land, and Strip Mine doesn't care which land you're destroying. It's more often played in dual decks, of course, but there are some multiplayer decks that make use of this ability, either by repeatedly playing Strip Mine from the graveyard or through some combo that lets you destroy all mana sources, all lands, of course. That would put it in the 4th or 5th bracket, since it essentially acts as a mass land denial. Swarmyard is a wonderful land that, when tapped, regenerates a target insect, rat, spider, or squirrel. By playing it, you get a bit of protection from effects like Blasphemous Act or various destroy effects, since you can regenerate a targeted Shelob or another spider, like Ishkana or Arasta, for example. Swarmyard is an amazing land. If you have rats, insects, or Chitterfang, then I think you already know about this land. But if you don't, then welcome to the wonderful world of Swarmyard. Terrain Generator is a way to ramp for 3 mana. For 2 and a tap, you can put a basic land from your hand onto the battlefield tapped. Most likely, since these are basics, you'll be playing it in 1 or 2 color decks. But Terrain Generator is generally a decent land. You can give it a shot if you really need to ramp hard. Thespian Stage, for 2 and a tap, becomes a copy of target land, except it keeps this ability. So, the copy can become a copy of another land again. Usually, Thespian Stage is combined with Cabal Coffers. That is, we can get a second Cabal Coffers. Since Cabal Coffers isn't legendary, we can copy some important, cool, or utility land from an opponent. We can also do the Thespian Stage and Dark Depths combo. We can make Thespian Stage a copy of Dark Depths. Dark Depths is a legendary land with 10 counters. When all 10 counters are removed, it's sacrificed and you get a 20/20 indestructible flying creature. So, what happens is we turn Thespian Stage into a copy of Dark Depths. And according to the legend rule, the original Dark Depths goes to the graveyard. Thespian Stage checks that it has no counters, but now it's a Dark Depths, so it gives us Marit Lage and is also sacrificed. So, for the cost of 2 mana and losing 2 lands, we get a 20/20 indestructible flying creature, which, basically, can close out the game. And that's our set of 29 lands. Next, we have 5 lands that will be directly in the main set, not on this sheet. But let me sum things up a bit. I have to say, I definitely recommend considering all Nexus lands with even minor synergies in your deck. I especially want to draw your attention to filter lands. If you know how to generate a large amount of mana, this land lets you cast double, triple, even quadruple pip spells in decks that aren't even built for that. And also pay attention to Echoing Deeps. It's also a very effective land, so for example, you can have it become Thespian Stage and keep copying something valuable. Now, let's take a look at the 5 lands that will enter the game along with new set. Most likely, these lands won't see much play in other formats, but in the Commander they could be very interesting. So, first up we have Agida Windswept Bastion. It's a planet land. This land enters the battlefield tapped, and produces white mana. It also has the Station ability. To activate Station, you need to tap another creature you control and put a number of charge counters on this planet equal to that creature's power. And Station can only be activated as a sorcery, meaning only during your turn. When there are 12 or more charge counters on it, this land will be able to create clones in white. Specifically, you'll be able to make token copies of target artifact or enchantment you control, except the copy is legendary. Of course, we can make a legendary copy of our Soul Ring, but I'd probably be considering some even bigger enchantments and artifacts. For example, we could copy something like a Phyrexian Portal, or a Smothering Tithe. Those second copies would really make a serious impact on the board. And overall, if we consider this land as a second or third bracket pick, it can actually prove to be quite effective. Yes, you'll need to copy something of your own, and you'll need to have something impactful of your own on the battlefield. But I think if you're running this land, you definitely know what you'd want to copy on your board. Let's move on. Evendo Waking Haven. Planet still enters tapped. It's green. But here, for 1 green and tapping it, you add 1 mana for each creature you control. So, this is basically another Gia's Cradle. Considering that green decks can have some pretty big creatures, I think by around turn 5, Evendo could already be activated. So from then on, you'll get a huge mana boost to your win. Cavern, Memorial World enters tapped. Everything else is the same. The ability. For 2 mana, tap and sacrifice a land, create a 2/2 colorless robot, then all creatures you control get +1/+0 and haste until end of turn. This land is probably the least likely to be used in EDH. I think it's the weakest one. Yes, you give haste for 3 mana. That's not bad, but there are other lands that provide haste too. Sure, usually it's just for 1 creature for 2 red mana. But here, we're giving it to the whole board. The big question is whether we can both spend 3 mana and also have enough creatures on the field that actually need haste. And my answer will almost always be no. It's just too slow. Maybe in the first or second bracket you could try to find a use for this land, but in the higher brackets, it's probably not going to happen. But this land caught my attention. Honestly, I'm even thinking I might try playing it in my Reanimator deck. We have Caesar Secundi, Void Avatar, Station 12. Still, for 2 mana, pay 2 life, sacrifice a creature, and draw cards equal to the sacrificed creature's power. Considering that by about turn 3 or 4 in my deck, I can reanimate a creature with power 6 or 9 and easily set up the station in 2 turns, then sacrifice that creature on turn 4 or 5 and draw up to 9 cards. Draw from 6 to 9 cards, on the 4th to 5th turn for the reanimator. This is half the victory. That can be really powerful. In other decks though, it'll probably be harder to pull off. Oh, and maybe you could play this somewhere in zombie decks, especially zombies that get a little bigger thanks to certain effects, and overall, in general, by turn 4 or 5, you'll usually have blockers and some creatures that, most likely could go on the attack. And if you basically skip one of your attacks and charge up this land, then in that same turn you'll be able to draw quite a few cards. And the option to draw a lot of cards based on a creature's power makes me happy. But most likely, this will be for reanimated decks. Reanimate or wide boards with the potential for Anthem effects. So +1, +1 to stats, or like +2, +1 to all zombies. You tap 2 or 3 zombies, and right away the land is charged up to use that ability. And the final land for today is Urthos, Titanic God Core. For blue, give blue for each artifact under your control. So, what we have here is a version of Tolarian Academy. Tolarian Academy is banned in EDH. And apparently, this is considered its fair version. Considering that in blue there can be constructs, and the size of the constructs can be equal to the number of artifacts you control, and the number of artifacts you control can be 5, 6, 7, already by turn 3 or 4, overall this god core will charge up very quickly, and will provide quite a large amount of mana. Interestingly, it is not an artifact, so it won't suffer from Vandal Blast and will just keep giving more and more and more mana. Well, friends, with that I'll say goodbye. Use utility lands and look for the right ones. Add them to your mana base, and trust me, the synergy of your decks will improve. And along with this improvement, some interesting game situations might happen, where you could end up as the winner, which is awesome. Or maybe you won't win, but you'll still make a positive impression at the table, and everyone will be surprised at how clever you are. With that, I'll say goodbye. This was Sergey. Don't forget to give a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. You can even hit the notification bell if you made it to this part of the video. See you in the next videos. Bye.